Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this regular meeting of the Administration and Projects Committee of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority. It's Thursday, May 3rd, 8:31 a.m., and we'll move on to public comment. I guess all of the committee members are here today. Is there any public comment on items which are not on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to approval of minutes. Do I hear a motion?
So moved.
It's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for the question. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. We're up to the consent calendar.
Move approval.
Is there a second? Does anybody wish to remove any items from the consent calendar? No. Any public comment on the consent agenda? Seeing none, we'll call for the question. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Did that motion carry unanimously? Or was that a burp I heard?
I think I said that, yeah.
We're going to record that as a 5-0 unanimous vote, including from Newell. That's, I'm sorry. Next, we're on to our regular agenda items, and we have our regular legislative update. And
Good morning.
Lindsay, are you going to begin?
Chair Trotter. Yes,
Thank you.
I'll just give you a brief update on some items of interest at the federal level, and then we'll let Mr. Watts dive into what's happening at the state level, because it's very busy there right now. So really quickly, the Self-Help Counties Coalition has been working with their various delegations regarding the FAA directive that came out that directs the use of excise sales tax generated at airports to be used only for aviation projects, which goes against the expenditure plans that many counties in California have passed. So we've been working with the Office of Napolitano, Representative Napolitano and Representative Lowenthal to try to bring an amendment to the recently passed FAA bill to exempt self-help counties from that, so that we can continue to deliver the projects promised to our voters and not have to divert any funding away from expenditure plans. And unfortunately, that was unsuccessful in this last round. Their amendments were not accepted, as is. There was a different proposal brought back to the self-help counties, but it would not exempt us from that particular use of dollars. So we've decided that we're going to be exploring other options, maybe other legal options. We're starting to look beyond California for a coalition of folks who may want to join us in this effort. So we have not given up the fight. We thought we might be able to accomplish that legislatively with the reauthorization of the FAA bill, and we were not successful with that. So that is something that doesn't have a huge impact on us here in Contra Costa. I think, Randy Carlton and I have been working on it's about between $30,000 and $60,000, we think, because California hasn't been able to give us a great answer, but it is significant for counties that have much larger airports like LAX and SFO in them. They're looking at millions of dollars of revenue that they no longer may have to spend on projects they put before their voters. So it is something that we're really concerned about. We're also concerned that it sets a bad precedent. That we have worked really hard. Our bond rating, our credit rating depends on us delivering our promises to our voters. And now with the ability for an agency to come in and just with a directive direct those dollars to some other project, we're worried that this could set a precedent that other agencies could potentially follow. So I just wanted to make you aware that we haven't talked about this issue in a while, but it's something that hasn't gone away, and it's certainly very top of mind, for the Self-Help Counties Coalition.
Thank you, Lindsay. Are there any questions on the federal level? Yes, Julie.
Yeah, I was wondering, I would suggest, just because they came to visit us, that we talk to Atlanta first. Mm-hmm. They certainly have big airports and could be impacted rather dramatically, and I suspect they have exactly the same concerns that we do. Mm-hmm. And that would be kind of a bi-coastal and maybe even a bipartisan request.
Yes. Yes, I do think, just if I may add one other item of note, we are planning the annual federal advocacy trip to Washington, D.C. with the chair and the vice chair in early June, and I do believe we'll be tailoring some visits to talk about this particular issue. And then just the last item of note, I know Tim's team is working very hard on some grant applications that are coming out, and so we're watching those funding notifications really closely, looking at potentially submitting something for mobility as a service. So we'll keep you posted as that progresses. We're just at the beginning of that process.
Other questions? I do have one, Lindsay. Is anybody at the CCTA, such as yourself, keeping tabs or monitoring the efforts in Congress to replenish the emergency funds for cities and counties that suffered in the 2017 rains and floods and fires and whatnot, including, in my case, Moraga, which is still looking to get fully reimbursed from FEWA money for some emergency outlays that had to occur. It seems to me that I'm not the only one in the county who may have a particular interest in this. Have you been following that, or do you know anybody who is following the fact that there's going to need to be a substantial congressional appropriation to replenish the fund for California?
We can certainly charge our federal advocates with looking into that more closely and maybe providing some additional information for us in the next report.
Any chance you could get that to me before a month from now?
Yes.
That would be great. Thank you. All right, any other questions before we move on to the state level and the presentation from Mark? Mark, you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee members. Two quick things I want to bring you up to speed on. I've been monitoring and reporting pretty much each month on the initiative to repeal and the measure to protect, SB1. But we're getting to the point in time where it's time to see if they qualify or not. They have reported widely throughout the press beginning last Friday that they were turning in 940, they being the repeal proponents, that they would be submitting over 940,000 signatures, which would put them well above the 568 that's needed. However, customarily in the state, you need to have a proportion along those lines to ensure that your validity rate is met so that you can qualify. So it's not clear whether they will qualify or not. I think a lot of folks think that they will. The next steps, if they have indeed submitted the petitions on a county-by-county basis and not dumped them all in Sacramento, as all the press accounts keep reporting, then each county registrar has 8 days to do a raw number count and submit that to the Secretary of State. Once that's occurred, if the raw number is met, then the next step progresses. If the raw number is not met, which is hard to imagine right now, but who knows, then the initiative fails to qualify on its face. So if they do meet the raw number count, then they go into a sampling process. And the sampling process, at the end of the day, when it's all totaled up, if the validity rate is below 95%, it fails to qualify. If it's above 110%, it automatically qualifies. If it's in that 95 to 110, it has to go to a full count. Here's where it gets interesting, because the full count gives each registrar 30 days. So now we've already expended 8 plus the validity, the random sampling time, getting close to the end of June, potentially, for all the reporting to come in. And the end of June is coincidentally close to 131 days before the election. So there could be a situation where they go into the full count, they qualify, but they qualify too late for 2018 and instead get placed on the 2020 because they don't meet the 131-day mark. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the pathway ahead, and I have to tell you, it's driving me crazy because I like to know what, black and white, what's happening. Did they do it or did they not? Did they qualify or did they not? But right now, I can't tell you that they have. With respect to efforts in the event it does qualify, I mentioned previously that the Coalition to Protect Local Transportation Improvements has fired up, and that the first round of business has been to build a coalition and generate support for Proposition 69. In addition, if this repeal initiative does qualify, then they would wheel around and be the campaign front. I mean that in the best way possible. The campaign face is the right way to say it, for the oppose the repeal initiative. So that's the best I can tell you right now. I'm in daily conversations. I met with the Legislative Analyst's Office in anticipation that the repeal initiative may qualify. They asked us to come in and give us our take on what the initiative actually does beyond what they've covered in their earlier fiscal analysis. So there's a lot of activity surrounding this, a lot of uncertainty until we get the word from the Secretary of State's office that it's either a go or no go. In addition, staff asked me to bring to your attention one measure. This is a local bill, a locally sponsored bill by Mr. Grayson, AB 2851, which would provide greenhouse gas reduction funds in the amount of about $2 million one time to a program that would allow Caltrans to hand out, distribute grants to cities within the MTC region, cities and counties within the MTC region that develop and implement signal synchronization programs. It's very similar in concept to an MTC, existing MTC program, but in this case, the program would be a little bit more independent from MTC. It would be cities would develop it using MTC metrics and report to MTC what they're doing, but the funding would be provided to Caltrans to distribute. The bill had been scheduled 2 weeks ago, then was put over, and then it was taken up this last week and passed out of the Committee of Transportation onto appropriations. So we'll see how that bill fares in appropriations and keep staff apprised of that measure as we go forward. The last thing I'll mention, I won't go into any details because I'm sure your staff here has covered that, but the biggest transportation news in the last week was all the grants that were awarded or nominated by either Caltrans, CTC, or CalSTA, and there's over $4 billion worth of grant proposals, half of which were actual awards for the TIRCP program. Some of that money's gone to BART, some of that money's gone to CCJPA. It's a long list, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but it was fairly evenly distributed. The highlight, I think, for this region or for your county was the almost $34 million in the local partnership competitive program, which is a remarkable amount because there's only $200 million to distribute statewide, and you got 1/6 of the money in one fell swoop. So it was a very, very fruitful application process, and I commend the folks, the grant writers who got that through the commission. So that's where I'll draw my report to conclusion and answer any questions.
Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions for Mark? Nope, not seeing any. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good job, staff.
Okey doke. We'll move on. Next up is item 13, which is Interstate 80 San Pablo Dam Road Interchange Reconstruction Phase 1, Project 7002. We have two items here. Who has the staff report on this? Ivan.
Good morning, Chair and committee members. My name is Ivan Ramirez, and I am the construction manager for the authority. And today we have an action item, actually two action items on this particular agenda item. And I will go through the details right now, and then I will open up the questions, and we can talk about the project. So this is regarding the I-80 and San Pablo Dam Road project. This is a construction contract. I have a slide here with a brief history for refresh the memories of the committee members that were here at the time, and for new committee members. We advertised the project on August 18 of 2015. Open bids September 29. The engineer's estimate was just under $16 million. We received a total of 9 bidders. This board awarded the contract to Brossemer & Wall on November 18, 2015. The duration of the contract when it went out to advertisement was 325 days, and the first working day was January 18, 2016. And when the contractors submitted their baseline schedule, as they are required to do once the project is awarded to them, they submitted a compressed schedule of 278 days. Now, we allow the contractor to do that in our contracts because we want to definitely incentivize them to look at the contract for ways to save time and money, and so we welcome that. We're not required to do that, so at any time we can fix the duration of our contracts, but as of right now, that's the way we operate, and it's significant in this project because as issues became and we had to contend with them in the field, there was the additional pressure of having to deal with a compressed schedule. This is a result of the first lowest bidders. If some of the committee members remember, a bidder was thrown out for being not responsive, and then we awarded, or the board awarded, the construction contract to Brossemer & Wall, as noted earlier. It's important to note that the difference between the top 5 bidders was only 3%. So that gives an indication that the bidders saw things pretty much the same. Nobody saw something unusual that will allow them to submit a bid much different than the other top 5 bidders. Another interesting thing to note here is that the lowest bidder was about $1 million over the engineer's estimate, and the second lowest was at 1.2. So right off the bat, this project was in a little bit of a handicap because we had to take funds and put them into the contract because the engineer's estimate was somewhat low from what was programmed into the project. This is a history of the construction allotment. We started with $19,300,000. A revision 1 was issued with the total allotment was not changed, remained the same. Then staff came to the board and they approved an increase in allocation of $1,850,000. Revision 3 was executed by executive director, again with no allotment in the increase, or no increase in the allotment, I should say. And today we're asking you for revision 4, which is an increase in the allotment of $610,500. That will allow us to continue with the work and compensate the contractor from additional costs related to some of the delays that we have encountered. And we're also asking for direction for a revision 5, which we project we're going to come back to you next month with a strategic plan amendment, bringing in additional $436,000 to the contract. At this point, staff expects that this is the last time we're going to account for additional funds, and we believe that we can complete this project with this revision 5. So this is the history. The green arrow is the planned work, and there was an increase in total to the contract of 14 months. And this is a chart that we call the MISO chart, which all those red dots indicates an issue that was encountered during the contract. So the project itself is very simple. On the left, we're supposed to remove an existing pedestrian overcrossing and replace it with a new one. And on the right, we're actually realigning El Portal Road, which is a road parallel to I-80, to make room for a new on-ramp and extend that on-ramp so it becomes an auxiliary lane. So it's fairly simple from a high view. However, during construction, all these issues were encountered. Some of them were different site conditions, design errors and omissions. We also had issues connecting to existing facilities. Maybe the diameter wasn't the right side as expected. Maybe the grade was different. It was in a slightly different location. We also had known and unknown utilities that we had to deal with. So the field crews, and that's the construction management firm and the contractor, work very hard to try to keep the project going. But nonetheless, we encountered issues that were just very difficult to overcome. So some of the coordination that we had to do included PG&E, AT&T, East Bay Mud, the sanitary district, the city of San Pablo, Caltrans, school district, among others. In addition to that, we also have to keep in mind that we wanted to have the public convenience be as good as possible during the construction, so we also made some expenditures related to that. So as noted again, all of these issues combined caused the budget to increase and also for the contract duration to be extended. And I'm going to go over some of the slides. I'll give you an idea of what we're dealing with here. The pedestrian overcrossing requires a fence for most of the bridge, if not all of the bridge, I should say. And in addition to that, it requires a handrail. And it turns out that the handrail portion of that work was underestimated by 728 linear feet. So right off the bat, just to put the rail in the bridge like it was supposed to, ended up costing about $60,000. This is another issue. This is at El Portal. Originally, for this segment of the road, we were supposed to do an overlay. However, as you can see here in this picture, it turns out that the paving was too high, and in fact, it required a milling. Once you mill, you have to put an additional layer to make it smooth. So this is what we consider a design error that had to be addressed. This is another issue that developed. This box that you see there, it's a bioswale that they're used to collect stormwater, so it doesn't drain into the treatment facilities, collects water, and we found out during construction that there was a T1 line right in the middle of it. So this is an issue where the interdisciplinary coordination between the drainage sub-consultant designer and the prime designer weren't communicating very well, and ended up impacting the project. And there were also different site conditions. At these sound walls along El Portal, all the log borings indicated they were going to be dry holes. Well, if you remember, during that season, a couple of seasons ago, it was very rainy after a long period of drought. So it ended up being that you needed to drill these holes in wet hole conditions, which requires a different type of excavation, because you have to support the wet soil when you're excavating and before you pour the piles. And that's why that red tank in the floor, that's something that is needed to be brought during wet hole pile drilling. It's not needed when it's dry hole pile drilling. So those are examples of some of the issues that we encountered during the progress. Those issues in the MISO chart delayed us about 4 months, but then after we were almost done, new issues developed that has caused us or preventing us from closing the project. And I'm going to go over some of them right now. One of them is an East Bay Mud line. That's the slide indicates here, the original location where it needed to be connected. This is certifiable. There's emails between East Bay Mud and us indicating that that's the location where it needed to be. And this is one of the last actions that needed to be taken during the construction contract, because we're just doing the irrigation. This is just for irrigation purposes. It turns out that when we tried to connect there, it no longer existed. We contacted East Bay Mud, and they asked the question, oh yeah, we capped that water line a while ago, so we're going to have to find another way. So all of this work, the installation of the line across the street and the installation of a water meter needs to be done by East Bay Mud. So it took a long time for them to get going, mobilize the staff, get the meter installed, and for us to finally come in and connect this line, which, as you can see, is further away than was shown in the plans. So this was a significant delay dealing with this utility that was primarily out of our control. Another big one is PG&E. They were supposed to do 3 power drops during the construction project, and these were supposed to have been done in early 2016. I have the dates here. We originally contacted them on July 2016 so that they could perform the drop, and we contacted them. They told us, well, we have a big backlog. We cannot attend to your project right now. And despite numerous attempts by staff, and that includes Hisham, our CM staff, myself, executive director, to PG&E to come and do this installation, they didn't do it until, for locations 1 and 2, until September of 2017, and for location 3, which is at the pedestrian overcrossing, until December of 2017. One thing I want to mention here is that the power drop number 3 was supposed to keep the lights on for the new pedestrian overcrossing. So without having some kind of power source, we couldn't have opened that POC and demolished the old one and allow the progress to proceed. So in this case, the field team, working with the school district, they allowed us to tap into their irrigation power source so that we could connect and power the pedestrian overcrossing so that we can continue working along that area of the project. The same is true with the other locations where Caltrans allowed us to tap into their existing power source so that the signals cooperate as we were completing them. So our partners worked with us to achieve some positive results here. Another one that occurred after we were done with the project is that there was a base bid where the striping along El Portal was performed. Shortly thereafter, there was complaints to the city regarding a right turn, and I have a slide here in the future to show that a particular problem. But nonetheless, we executed a change, and that was completed in 2017. And after that, there was a subsequent change order that needed to be issued because people were not navigating the new El Portal turn, and you can see that in the middle picture there. People were actually hitting the curb, hitting the plants, hitting the sidewalk because they were going too fast. So we had to engage our partners again to find a solution to slow down traffic to that turn. So this was the original complaint. This is per plan. That right lane will allow traffic to go straight through the intersection, but it also allow a right turn into the new on-ramp onto I-80. Well, because some traffic was stopped there and wasn't turning, then it was causing a backup for the people that wanted to turn to go onto I-80. So this was a particular problem during the morning when people were wanting to go to work and they were on I-80 and they're just waiting there and until that first vehicle moves after the green light. So we worked with the city, we worked with Caltrans. This took a long time because Caltrans required traffic counts, so we had to send our sub out there to do the traffic counts and come up with a new way to address the problem, if it was justifiable to allow the change, which is to change that right lane to go onto the highway by itself. So left lane is for through traffic, right lane is just to go onto I-80. On the opposite side of the freeway, we had a conflict that was done per design where the left turn coming off of the I-80 forced people to go basically a U-turn onto going in the opposite direction into I-80. So people, of course, were complaining because that they were trapped. There was traffic on the adjacent lane, so they were trapped. They couldn't merge. So working again with Caltrans in the city, we blocked that left turn there shown in the middle, and we just allow that left turn to go into either lane, whether they want to go back onto the freeway or they wanted to continue along El Portal. So those changes took a long time because it requires a lot of coordination, a lot of redesign. When you take these issues to Caltrans, all the units have to be involved. It's hard to get a consensus, how to approach it, and what the final solution is, but we're behind those issues as well. Another issue that developed late in the contract was that the pedestrian overcrossing developed some bridge cracks or deck cracks. And it's a concern for a bridge that new to develop this type of cracks. So staff was concerned, so staff hired an independent structural engineering firm, Degencol, to perform an analysis of what they thought went wrong here. And they reviewed the plans and the construction records, and they did a field visit. And based on those, they determined that there is an issue with the design. There is an issue on above the columns that are shown on the circles, where there's something called a negative moment, and basically stretches the deck. You address that by putting more reinforcement through those areas, and apparently that was not done.
Can you describe a little more for me what a negative moment is? I mean, I know you're trying to keep this at a very high level, but I'm curious. What is a negative moment, and how is that a design issue?
So I'm going to do the best to explain it here. So assume this is a column, and this is a deck. As it becomes loaded through its own weight and through pedestrian, it will try to bend down. It's just that force of gravity will try to bend down. So it's stretching the top of the concrete. It will tend to stretch, and that will tend to open
On
cracks.
both sides of the column.
Yeah, on both sides of the column. That's correct. For the
That's
most
called
part.
a negative moment.
That's called a negative moment.
Maybe there
Because
are
the positive moment-
two negative moments per column.
Well,
One side and the other side.
we call it negative moment just in general. No, we don't call it double.
Yeah.
It's just not a good moment.
It's just not a good moment. Okay, all right. As usual, Bob has distilled the essence of this comment, so I'm going to let you keep going. Thank you, Ivan.
You're welcome. So there's ways to address that, right? So I addressed that with let me talk about also, because I moved the slide a little fast here. These are shrinkage cracks, what they call shrinkage cracks, these other cracks that are shown here. And these are primarily on the school side, where you have a ramp. That ramp goes a couple of times between the bridge height and the parking lot elevation. And shrink cracks also develop in concrete is well known. Talking to the structural engineer the authority hired, he indicated as well that even though these are significant shrinkage cracks, and some are to be expected, that they could easily be addressed during the design. I mean, he was very adamant about it because I was questioning about it. So anyways, we're still dealing with this. Another issue that developed late in the contract. It's preventing us from closing it. This is actually the last issue the main issue that we're dealing with in the contract, and we're trying to resolve right now. So in essence, that red chart with all what we call the MISO chart, in essence, that forced a 4-month delay, which I think the team did a great job of keeping it at 4 months. Subsequent to that, there were additional delays that we're still dealing with at 10-month delay. So that has caused our contractor to have to be out there longer, especially at the beginning. For those 4 months, they had to have additional, or I shouldn't say additional, they had to have their staff on the job. They had to have the field office open a little longer, some equipment. So, and after that, after those 4 months, they closed the field office. The equipment, for the most part, was removed. But it still continued to incur some costs. It amounts to about $680,000, and that's one of the reasons why we're here today, because we want to execute this change order. If you so allow the funds to be increased at the allotment, then we want to be able to pay this. So I wanted to put a slide here as to what we're doing with the deck. Right now, Caltrans has approved a procedure that they will be willing to accept. Is methacrylate is the product we're putting. It's like a sealant of cracks that they use throughout the state. And we're waiting for AECOM. AECOM has known about the designer has known about this issue. The designer is AECOM. And we're still waiting for a formal response of whether they think is their responsibility or not. We estimate the repairs to be about 80,000. It says 100,000 there, but it's roughly 80,000. And hopefully Caltrans will accept this. All indications are that as long as we put the methacrylate, that they will indeed accept it. So once the bridge is repaired and we remove the graffiti, project's done. So I know some of the committee members sometimes ask us what you guys are taking away from all these issues. I think staff has determined that, and this is a practice that we have, is just that sometimes it's very difficult to get the CM team here at the 65% PS&E, but it's critical because a lot of issues can be found when you have the construction management from looking at it from construction. We also need to do a better job of doing, finding out where the utilities are. I think that there are several levels, and I think using quality level A, which is the most thorough, is not 100% proof where you're going to find everything, but it gives you the highest level of certainty. Well, also, when we do utility relocation, we need to have a full-time inspector out there, because one of the issues that we encountered in the project was that we had paid East Bay Mod to relocate the facilities, and then later on they were in the way of the work. So it's kind of painful situation to be in. We also need to encourage our designers to use clash detection software. We also need to make sure that the designers have a quality control plan and staff enforces it. We also need to do a better job, or designers need to do a better job of increasing and verifying the actual existing facilities when they're connecting to them. And we probably need to think about higher contingencies in urban areas, like in West County. So with that, staff recommends approval of Resolution 1557P, which will increase the construction allowance by $600,500 by adding $117,000 from East Bay Mod and $493,500 from Measure J, for a new total value of $21,763,000 and $596. Let me say that again: $21,763,596. One thing to mention here, the $117,000 from East Bay Mod is money that they had to give back to us because one of the water mains broke during the project, and they actually asked us to fix it for them. So we tracked those costs, and it took an immensely amount of effort to get the money back, but we finally did. So that's where that money is. And in addition to that, we also are seeking approval for staff to seek the WICTAC approval for concurrence to amend Measure J strategic plan to reprogram $436,404 from I-86 Central Avenue project to the San Pablo Dam Road project in return for recommitting an identical amount from the 2020 STIP to I-80 Central Avenue Phase 2. And with that, I am open to any questions.
And I think you're going to get some. Bob?
Design and emissions, who's responsible? You know me, I hate change orders, but this is kind of a large change order.
Design and emissions, wow. And then I guess the other one, explain to me how contingency went down the drain. Do we reestablish a contingency? Or, so anyway, those are two questions. And
So-
I don't mean to take a lot of your time, but wow. Because I guess this thing is growing, and I'll be honest with you, you're so good, I did not understand your last two paragraphs. STIP, in other words, when you got done at the very end, I didn't understand a word you said, but that could be just my mentality. But if you could tell me, design and emissions, shouldn't a lot of this been caught?
So design errors and omissions are an issue that staff has brought up with the designer. We have been going through some discussions now for a few months about errors and omissions, and they're aware of where we are. I think that I'm going to characterize them as difficult. They acknowledge that there are some issues. but they don't necessarily agree to how much they ended up costing.
How much do we think they cost?
We have a number out there. It's not very hard because as you go through each change order, it's sometimes you find stuff in there that might be a error and omission, or it might not be, because we issue change orders and we issue addendums to those change orders. So you have to take it one by one. But if I had to throw a number out there, I would have to say it's about $1 million.
In design, errors and omissions.
Yeah, but I have to caution you about something though. That I have consulted with our attorney, and there's the concept of upcharge. So let me give you an example. Is the handrail? The handrail was missed, but if you would have put this contract in a complete manner, the handrail would have been there as part of the project. So by virtue of being part of the project, and you don't pay the entire $60,000, or we wouldn't collect the full, even though it cost us $60,000, we wouldn't collect the $60,000. We will only collect that amount that is very difficult to compute and calculate, or why is it more expensive in construction than it would have been during bid. So there is a lot of change orders like that where we end up paying. It's not what we're going to be able to collect. So regarding the second question, right now is the contingency, where we're pretty much depleted. That's why we need to come to you for additional funds. We have some money that we can continue to complete the project, but we need the money to pay the contractor for his overheads and then take care of the deck repairs.
Say that again, and I apologize.
Put your microphone on, Bob.
Michael. So how much are we going to have in contingency? How much do we have to put in now? I would have presumed 10% we had, correct?
So right now, the money that we're bringing in is to close out the project. There is no money for contingency because the work is primarily done. It's almost done. So there is no work for which we have to put a contingency. So the money that we're asking you to bring in is to complete the project. It's just what we know the costs are going to be.
And if there is another issue, then you would be back before us again for more funds.
That's if there's a significant issue, we will have to come back to you for more funds. But right now, staff doesn't foresee the situation.
Next, I guess we'll hear from Newell Arnerich.
Yeah, thanks. Ivan, I think there's three good things that have happened here. One, I'm glad you're on this project. I've been following this since, we kind of saw things going sideways. And you've done an outstanding job to dive in deep, find solutions, and you have been working with AECOM, and I think it's better that conversation is left between you and them at this point before it comes out to us. But I think your approach and the methodology is absolutely spot on for doing that, and you're trying to, preserve our interest in the highest level. I think the second thing is, and I've only been through those the new intersections about 6 or 7 times. They're really good solutions, and those last fixes that you illustrated there absolutely needed to be done. Those really were design problems, and it works really well. I mean, it's really probably the best thing that's happened to San Pablo and there in helping ease some backup on the freeway and things like that. And the third thing that I think is really good out of this was your list of lessons learned, and you applied these immediately to all the other projects that we're AAAing ourselves. I think this last $480,000, the real point that I get out of this, we need to close this contract out, because we've had to spend $680,000 just to hold the contractor on site over this past 14 months. And truthfully, we needed them. Without them, we still wouldn't be able to do this. And then I guess the question I see is the only outstanding issue, just to be clear, is the crack design solutions. The temporary fix is $80,000 to $100,000, but it's unknown what that fix is going to be for a permanent solution and what that's going to cost. Is that correct?
So that is correct. Based on the conversations that we have had in the field with Caltrans, with their personnel, Caltrans actually brought out their utmost concrete expert, and he basically told Caltrans staff that if they apply the methacrylate, that they should accept the project. So if they indeed do that, Caltrans has accepted responsibility for any long-term issues with the deck. And Rick is his name, he explained that he doesn't expect any major issues for 10 years. And this is him speaking, not myself. But,
Okay, so that's good to know, because I think that was the only, and I think that's what.
I just thank you for the comments. I appreciate them, Commissioner.
Yeah. But I think that's what Bob was talking about. What else is there? So, if that's it, I understand we really need to close this contract out. The $480,000 relative to this size project is not a big deal. But I think what you really illustrated was the magnitude. This is the one project that, as a percentage over the long course of the time, has had a lot of issues to it. But again, most important, this was, first of all, I think this was our first AAA project, wasn't it? Or is this
no, it's about a third, but it's the first one in West County.
Yeah, and I think you're right that you have to look at the I-680 corridor area. There were no documents that are available for those infrastructure improvements there, so it's a lot of it is unfortunately going to be discover and find. Unlike Highway 4 or the 680 corridor, where it's new enough, documentation exists, the standards that we know today for overlapping utilities is so much higher level, so I appreciate that. I think we got to move forward with this. We got to do this. I personally appreciate you have put a tremendous amount of time to find out the who, what, when, and why, and get us to the best position. And I know still behind the scenes what you're working on is going to get us there. So I appreciate that, and I'd support moving ahead with this motion.
We'll get there eventually. Tom?
Well, first of all, that was a very good presentation, very clear. And I also support the staff recommendation. Look at some of the questions came up, and both Bob and Newell touched on this, but I'm not sure I got the answer. The design errors and emissions, did any of those rise to the level of being the result of negligence? Has anybody made that analysis?
So we asked the question of our attorney in regards to that, and our attorney feels that if the standard of care is not applied, or an issue arises because the standard of care was not applied, then that's a negligence. By virtue of that is negligence. So we're looking, all these things virtually turn out to be negligence.
What was the last thing you said? All of them what?
So if we find that there's design issues that are due to lack of care or the standard of care was not applied, then they're considered negligence.
So that's something you're looking at?
Yes.
So you're still looking at the possibility of making a claim or trying to pursue a recovery? Okay. Second question is, did this project, and I guess that's a bigger question. I've been meaning to ask this before, and I don't know why I haven't, but do these projects typically get some kind of peer review? They go through a peer review process?
So per Caltrans requirements, we're supposed to have a constructability review, and in this particular project, Caltrans performed a review of the construction documents.
Who did it?
Caltrans themselves. And we normally have a peer review. In our case, when we brought the CM firm, it was at a very advanced level. So a lot of issues were not able to be cut. And not only that, but we were racing against time because we needed the federal funds to come in at a certain time. And we needed to have everything lined up.
Yeah.
So when the team came on board for us, it was late. But the answer to your question is all our projects have some kind of peer review. Yes.
Nothing against staff here, but something you might want to look at is doing a third-party peer review for these projects. And then the the last thing had to do with the delays caused by the utilities. You know, this is something that just drives me crazy and has forever. You know, East Bay Mud, PG&E, they have no sense of urgency. They're on their own schedule. They'll take forever to do what needs to be done to hook up utilities or make changes. And I've always hoped that maybe the California Public Utility Commission, in the case of PG&E, would put some kind of motivation on them to be more responsive, because they cost people a lot of money. They cost the economy a lot of money by dragging their feet. And so, in your lessons learned, I mean, it might be worth writing a letter to the California Public Utility Commission and say, look, PG&E cost us whatever, they cost us $500,000 on this project, and, please do something to motivate them to do otherwise. East Bay Mud, they're not a public utility. I mean, they are a public utility, but they're not a investor-owned utility. But I think somewhere a letter to the East Bay Mud Board telling them the problems that have been caused by East Bay Mud dragging their feet and what it's cost us would be maybe in order. That's it. That's my 2 cents. And I'll move the staff recommendation.
Second.
There's been a motion and discussion, a motion and a second. Do you have who got it? It's Butt and Arnerich. But we have more questions. For me, I mean, just an observation, first of all, Ivan. I mean, I've only been across the new San Pablo Dam Road improvements once, so I don't have a real strong recollection of that. But the way that I get north sometimes from Moraga is to go up San Pablo Dam Road and then toward El Portal and get on the freeway. And I can tell you that was always a very constrained in the pre-construction condition. It was a very difficult, messed up situation. And so having gone through it since it's been redone, I agree with Newell that it's vastly improved and the design is better. So I look at this as I put on my lawyer's hat, and I look at this from the standpoint of recourse. And so I have some questions in that regard. Is it correct to say that there's really nothing the CCTA can do from the standpoint of recourse, legal recourse, to address the fact that this project was delayed by PG&E and East Bay Mud? Do we have any ability to go to them and say, write us a check, dude?
Okay, so that's not my expertise, but my understanding is that you can't. There is no recourse for that.
No, I sometimes you ask a question knowing that that's the answer, so I agree with Tom that letting them know, or letting the Public Utilities Commission know that their lack of responsiveness has real-world financial impacts on the CCTA and the good work we're trying to do for the public is something that we should do. So that's one. When I look at your presentation and I look at everything that went wrong here, and obviously it was not every project goes smoothly. I get that. The only question in my mind is the shrinkage cracks that you talked about. Is that a design defect? Is that a construction defect? Are we having conversations with the contractor on that particular aspect, suggesting that maybe the pours weren't done right or something like that?
So that's a very good question. Originally, when this first came up, we had all the parties involved as potential responsible for this. We had the contractor, we had the construction management firm, and we had the designer. The contractor brought up his own structural expert, right? And he was able to say, well, I think that this might have been missed, it has nothing to do with us, check the record. So they were in a defensive position. But to answer your question, once we engaged the structural engineering firm, and he was very adamant that this was a design issue, we kind of took that direction, where we sent a their letter, we sent a letter to the designer to respond to it. So
They responded
well,
to
they
the
have.
letter?
So in my opinion, in my personal opinion, they haven't responded because the letter that we sent to them was a stamp engineering opinion, and what we got in return was just a letter without their stamp. So in my opinion, it's not an engineering opinion. They just wrote something back. And by doing so, they just said, well, they should look at the quality of the concrete and, you know, was something wrong with the amount of water. Don't quote me on that, but something along the lines of there's something wrong with the mix and that kind of thing. So it would take a lot more money to go to that level, to go and you know, core a piece of concrete, send it to a lab, see how much admixture was there and how much water was there. And, but he also reviewed the records that are available from the construction staff, and he didn't raise any issues about those.
And he did, and I didn't hear the last part of that.
He did not raise any issues about the curing of the concrete or the application of curing compound or how long it took for the forms to come down. He didn't take any issues with that.
So the contemporaneous records with respect to the pores didn't indicate a problem?
That's correct.
Okay.
At least that's his opinion.
Okay. So I guess a follow-on question then is that you're recommending that we close out this project and pay the contractor off. If the direction of the authority was to take another look at that issue, we would be able to reserve our rights, if necessary, to go back and revisit the issue after paying them for their work on this and say, well, we might have a back charge, but let's leave that for a future time.
That's something that we definitely can do, yes.
All right. So the way I guess I would look at this then is that you know, that's something that, you know, we want to get to the bottom of, so we're trying to learn lessons here. So with respect to the contractor, it sounds like there's a difficult environment, and it sounds like the principal finger pointing, if anything, is at the designer for a whole bunch of reasons. And I mean, on the question of errors and omissions, I mean, if you're basically, Tom, if somebody, you know, if the design is a problem and it triggers your errors and omissions policy as for coverage purposes, you've got a claim for negligence. I think it's sort of going hand in hand. I just have one other question under the excuse me, under the lessons learned. And you said we needed to have an increased contingency in urban areas, particularly on the west side. Which I think that's actually, you know, it should be only a west side contingency, but that's, we can call it the Tom Butt contingency for urban areas in future. But I was just trying to learn here. You said one of the lessons learned is we should be doing clash detection software. What's clash detection?
So this is a software that would have identified the issue with the one that I showed earlier with the bioswale and the electrical conduit, because what happened is that the electrical conduit is showing on the electrical side. But when you're a bidder, right, you send the electricals to the electrical, you send the drainage to the
So
drainage
there were
side.
two sheets with inconsistent information.
That's right. With
Got
the
it.
software, you should be able to overlap those drawings. By the way, it can be done visually too, like Tim says that that's the way it's normally done, and it captures a lot of errors. But there's software available now that will do it for you in no time.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. I appreciate your report. Actually, very clear, and I learned a lot. Thank you. Julie.
Yeah, I'm not going to repeat everything that the engineers on this panel or the lawyers on this panel have said. They're absolutely accurate, and living with a project manager for almost 50 years now, yeah, I've heard all of this many, many times over. So I think the suggestion of letters to the PUC, while it'll go totally unnoticed by them, I think the letters to East Bay Mud and to PG&E should be written. They should also be shared with our media. They should be shared with the Chronicle and with the East Bay Times. They need to know that these kinds of things are costing the public money, big money. I think it's really important to also cite not just the delays and the cost of that time, but the lack of accurate information from those utilities was part of the cost. And frankly, the design issues are design issues that we need to pursue. This whole thing, I assume that Caltrans approved the traffic issues and then they came back afterwards, or how did that come about? Was that something that didn't get checked in design, or? I mean, redoing it twice after the initial is ridiculous.
Yeah, so the original design was reviewed and approved by Caltrans, but
Yeah.
and then because of the public complaints, they went ahead and looked at it a second time, and they reviewed and approved it as well. Actually, they had a lot of input into it, and then the third time as well. But that happens frequently.
Seems like some of that should have been predictable. I am wholly in favor of continuing to pursue the design issues and the cross-finger pointing and saying, no, it's somebody else's fault. I'm sorry. If it's designed right in the first place, it shouldn't happen. So, but I think we need to let the public know that our, quote, public utilities are costing us a lot of money. 18 months by PG&E is outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. And there should be outrage from our public.
So, Bob, we're going to get to you in a sec. I think when we do send those letters, I would make a motion that Julie Pierce sign the letters.
Happy to.
Send the letters to the media. But although that might be contrary to protocol, I think.
It might be.
So I have a follow-up question on the utility issues and the fact that things were not in the right place. That again, where does CCTA get its information in terms of locating utilities when it goes out to bid? Does it get those from the utilities? Does it go independently verify them? What is the process there?
So the first thing that a designer would do is collect the as-built information from the utilities, and that would be the first step of an indication where these utilities exist.
So we had problems here because things did not show up where they were supposed to when we actually got out in the field.
So the deal with there's a number of issues here, right? And I wanna make sure that I address them all.
Thank you.
There are utilities that were missed by the designer. Okay, so
Say no more.
okay, there are utilities that nobody knew were there, and that includes Caltrans utilities. That was actually
And what did the utilities know about where these things were? When you say nobody knew, that means the utilities that were responsible for those lines didn't know they were there?
I think that's the case in some instances. That's right.
And that would include PG&E and East Bay Mud?
I will have to check on the specific utilities.
So if that's part of the letter, too.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. And Bob, you wanted to say something?
Final comments. First of all, we're not grilling you. I think we're getting an education this morning, at least so I don't want you to think that because I agree with the commissioners here. Hell of a job. I don't know how you did it. Your hair is still dark, so. But I guess what I'm asking.
Grecian formula.
But I guess what I'm asking is the last two paragraphs you stated, STIP funds. Could you kind of tell me, what did you say?
So let me defer that specific item to Hisham because he's the one that works with the funding side. So I'm gonna.
Okay, because you did mention how some of it's going to be paid, or
I think so. Yes.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, board members. What we're recommending is basically to move some Measure J money from I-80 Central to I-80 San Pablo Dam Road to pay for the last cost increase. Because we don't want to, we want to keep I-80 Central whole. We don't want to just take money from it. We are proposing that we pre-commit from our next future STIP cycle, the State Transportation Improvement Program, which we get to recommend on how to program, to basically pre-commit an identical amount to I-80 Central to keep it whole. So they don't lose any money.
We've done that on Highway 4, numerous projects in your area to help those projects advance.
I just needed clarification.
If I may add, if we're successful with the designer, and I'm sure we will be given all the issues, we may not we may have to come back basically and say we want to give back the Measure J money to I-80 Central because we got reimbursed by the designer. Yeah. Thank you.
All right.
Again, Ivan, thank you very much, because, wow.
Newell?
I just want to circle back and make sure I agree with Chair Trotter about one thing, and I think I hear it from all of us, that while we want to close out the construction portion of this project, that we want to have staff vigorously proceed, and we should stay out of the conversation and not try to draw information out because it will affect their negotiation. Maybe saying something, trying to answer a question that may contradict what they're negotiating with our designers. But it's clear, and there's no question, that they made some real errors, and that we have in place now how to try to get our construction management team back in it, or starting at the 60%, 65% design, which is not deep into construction drawings, to head off those things. And that's really our peer review that we didn't have on this project. But aside from that, it's really important that, know that we as the board are fully behind the negotiation to vigorously proceed with that. Does everybody agree with that? Because that's an important message they're looking for. And if we can't negotiate it, then we need to act on their insurance. Because right now you are attempting, which I think if it was my company in that circumstance, I would rather try to negotiate myself and do that and not go through my insurance. But if we can't, then we have to, and it's going to be a drawn-out process, but it's a more public process if that happens. So I do hope that you're successful in negotiating and getting this resolved and getting what's due to us.
All right, is there any further comment on this item? Is there any public comment on this item before we take action on this? Seeing none, we'll bring it back. My understanding of the motion is that we're just dealing with 13.1. Is that the understanding everybody else has? And the motion is to approve the proposed resolution with respect to the $610,500 being allocated that we have available right now to the contingency amount. And so we'll take that question first. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. I think it would also be appropriate for someone to make a motion along the lines of what Newell said with respect to pursuing all appropriate avenues for obtaining legal redress from other third parties, and to say something about writing letters.
Maybe we could modify that motion, just have it as part of that.
I'd rather have it be separate.
Okay.
Because the resolution,
I would make
the
that
resolution
motion.
is
Okay.
separate.
I would make that motion then.
Second.
Okay, do you understand the motion, everybody? Letters to both the utilities with copies, and the Public Utilities Commission with copies to the media,
Good.
and pursuing. Yes, Bob.
Just clarification here, and Newell and you guys are much smarter than I am. Would the other people involved, would they get a CC on any of this?
So let's leave. I mean, those letters will be drafted and reviewed at some level. We'll.
Wherever appropriate.
Yeah. Okay. Is that sufficient direction for purposes of the motion, everybody? It is. Then I'll call for the question. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. We'll move on to 13.2, but I think that's going to be very fast.
I would move approval of 13.2.
Have we already gotten the staff report? I think we probably have. All right. It's been moved and seconded. Do we get the motion moved by Julie, seconded by Bob Taylor? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. We're on to 14.
Mr. Chair, I just want to make a quick comment. We should really acknowledge, though, the contractor, I think, has done a pretty good job in navigating this, trying to keep this project in with a lot of adverse circumstances, and I hope we just acknowledge that.
Yeah, and it interferes. That'll interfere with our ability to go after them for badly poured concrete. But what the heck? I'm kidding.
I would just say that because of the delays, it certainly had to have thrown their schedule way out of whack. And, they're a contractor that we work with a lot, and we appreciate they're trying to accelerate the project and get it done expediently. They certainly had no idea when they were going into it that they were going to run into all these issues. So we do appreciate those partnerships, and we're just as bummed about it as they are.
Comment on that,
Please,
follower.
please.
Would you state the same contractor on my project? Would you, because that follows right up with Julie.
That's correct. Brosmer and Wall, they're a joint venture over at the Balfour project, or State Route 4. However, they are the managing partner, so they are the ones that are managing the contract. So both contractors are working on both projects.
Both ends of the county.
Great, thank you. Then we'll move on to item 14, that's correspondence and news clippings. Anybody want to talk about that, or is there anything staff wants to point out specifically for the record?
No comments.
Anybody have any questions about that by the committee? Seeing none, we'll move on to 15, which is commissioner and staff reports. I guess I'll just sort of report out, the ad hoc subcommittee with respect to the AAA aspects of all this continues to do its work, and we will be meeting in the near future with Habib with respect to some of these CCTA donation issues. That's all. Anybody else? Seeing none, is there a basically staff comment?
I just had one comment. I wanted to clarify what Mark Watts was talking about in terms of the local partnership competitive. So what he was discussing was the staff recommendations that actually came out last week. That still requires a CTC vote, and that vote's supposed to happen in May. And so once that vote happens, then in June, we'll be seeking an allocation of STIP funds, the $18.8 million, and then also allocation of $20.5 million a SHOP. And so through that, 684 Phase 3 will hopefully be fully funded at that time, and then we're planning on advertising that project in the summertime. So,
Great. Thank you. Okay, moving on to 16, item 16, other business, there's none. At this point, we're going to recess into closed session. The item here is public employee performance evaluation. Are we up and running? All right. We're coming out of closed session. We had a very short closed session. It lasted about 4 minutes. This item could not be considered because our executive director's flight arrived late and he was unable to join us. So the report out is that we are going to schedule this evaluation for a future special meeting of the Administration and Projects Committee, which is tentatively being scheduled for prior to our regular CCTA board meeting. So this would be on May 16th at 5 p.m. prior to the 6 p.m. regular board meeting. And I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries unanimous. We are adjourned at 9:46 a.m. Thank you, everybody.